Respected Sri C.P. Nair, good friend Mr. Shiv Shankar, ladies and gentlemen and student friends. My role is to convey to you what was discussed at the session that I was coordinator of, along with Dr. Uma Jyoti. We were co-coordinators at that session. We had three main speakers: Sri Viju Krishnan, or Dr. Viju Krishnan, Joint Secretary of the All India Kisan Sabha; Dr. Midul Eapen from the Planning Board; and Sri Job Zakaria from the UNICEF. A very interesting session, very good participation, and it was something which was very interesting. But I was just looking at the numbers of people who are here. Nearly 2,000 student leaders from around the country, of whom nearly 600 or 700 are from outside Kerala. And there are 25 states and union territories represented here. And you also have from Nepal, Afghanistan, Namibia, Bangladesh, and Uzbekistan, you have representatives here. So actually, you are in a way the future of what India has to be. And that is something which I think would get reflected. I congratulate the Honorable Speaker and the organizers for getting this event done. To get together so many people from around the country to such an event is not an easy task. I will quickly run through the sessions and then I'll give you some of my thoughts. The organizers have said spend about 10 to 15 minutes. I have, of course, started off with a few of my remarks. And what I said was actually all of those who are participating here today, and I mentioned that to my group there, all of you are very lucky. All of us are very lucky. We were luckier at that time because only 10% of the people at that time got higher education. You are lucky, but we were luckier because today 20 to 25% of the population gets higher education. But you should remember that a vast majority of the population does not get access to higher education. So you're very, very lucky people. And you have an obligation to those because of whom, or those who are paying for your higher education. So that is something which is very important, and that has to be at the back of your mind when you work in whatever areas you're doing as you go forward. The other one which I mentioned was, and I think Mr. Shiv Shankaran talked about it, is the rising intolerance in this country. The intolerance does not mean just killing. Intolerance just does not mean lynching. Intolerance just does not mean, trying to hit out at somebody who's done something on Facebook or on social media which you don't like. Intolerance also is when somebody hits your car, and that was an example which was given there, and you get down and you shout at the person without really looking at why you are doing it. Okay, but the thing there is, on this intolerance, you find that the privileged are more intolerant than the underprivileged. Those who have are more intolerant than those who don't have. And that is something which needs to change. So unless you start thinking that you are luckier, you are better off than somebody else, and therefore you need to accept certain things, society is not going to change. If that doesn't change, whatever development you talk about is not going to be of value as we go forward. I also talked about integrity being very important. Okay, when you look at whatever is getting discussed today in politics across governments, you will find that the integrity of people in government, whether in power or outside of power, you find that the integrity of officers in government, the integrity of politicians, integrity of businessmen are all being questioned. If there is no integrity in what you do, when I say integrity, is not corruption alone. It is also what you say and what you practice, what you promise and what you deliver. That's all about integrity. There again, that is something which is very important. And you cannot be a good leader without having integrity at a certain level. There is one thing I started off by saying, and I would withdraw that statement now. I said that that stage was a very inclusive stage. This stage is not inclusive because If somebody came in a wheelchair, he wouldn't be able to get onto the stage. So I request the secretariat, the assembly, see, next time when you have a function, irrespective of whether you have a person on a wheelchair or with crutches coming in, every stage has to be inclusive. So that stage was inclusive and I commended them for that. But this stage is not inclusive. Just like we talk about the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, there are also a very large population in this country who have disabilities. And that is something which we never think about when we look at development. How many people here know somebody who is blind? Can you raise your hands? How many people know somebody who is deaf? Raise your hands. How many of you know somebody who is autistic? Raise your hands. Good. So some of you have a feel of it. But just try out some things when you go home and then you will realize what it means. Walk into home, blindfold, sit in front of the television and listen to your most favorite television program or news broadcast. You will understand what it means to be blind. Stuff your ears with cotton and sit in front of the most beautiful songs that you enjoy, and then you will understand what it means to be deaf. Try not to know what is happening around you and you will know what it means to be autistic. But these are some things which we need to look at when we talk of a sustainable development for the society. It needs to be inclusive in all forms. Dr. Mridul Eapen focused on the necessity and methods to involve the youth in sustainable development and nation building. She said that we need to find ways by which we can get the youth involved in this. She had some suggestions on that. She said that a lot of our problems are because of the where it is not equally, the equitable distribution is not happening. And we find that there is a lot of transformation or development that is happening, but it is very, very unequal. And she said that this inequality comes in the case of class, gender, urban, rural, adult, youth, the rich and poor bias. And all these, a lot of policies are driven by that. So the bias comes in the policy and those changes need to happen. She says that the state has become, when she mentions state, she's not talking of this state, she's talking of state as a state, which means it's government anywhere in the country. State has become a facilitator for people with resources, leading to more inequalities and the lopsided development that happens. She also talked of democracy as a form of government that revolves around the concerns of the people and the kind of government that has been facing a lot of challenges. Dr. Mridul Eapen talked about providing them, in terms of how do you get youth involved in the development of the country, providing them with good role models, good teachers, parents and leaders can be good role models for everyone. Grooming and training them to face real situations. She cited the case of the Kerala floods, when the youth played a proactive role in that. And I should say there, Mr. Shivshankaran also covered that, but when you're from Kerala, wherever you go and talk, you need to talk about how society as a whole came up, irrespective of their religion, their caste, their political affiliations, when it was the way they actually mobilized themselves for the entire relief operations. And I think that was something which a lot of people did not. And I heard somebody my age, or maybe younger than me, tell me, I never thought my son would be so responsible. Okay? Because he suddenly found that he doesn't see his son at home. Earlier, if he didn't see his son at home, the son was actually partying with somebody or going somewhere. He works in Technopark, and he thought, and everyone said that the youth at Technopark really are not socially committed. He said, now, my son was not coming home for a few days. And I got worried, and then I realized that he was at the relief collection centers, at the relief camps. So that is the kind of things which in a well-educated society, the kind of changes that you will see happen. She talked about ensuring broad public participation in everything that we do. She said we need to find ways of eliciting opinion from the youth in terms of what we do. The next speaker, before I get to the next speaker, I need to ask a question to this group here. How many of you, if you were given today, assuming that you had your qualifications, you had your PhD, and you got some good research papers, would accept an offer as a faculty member in a reputed university if it came to you today, now? How many of you would accept that offer? Good number. How many of you would accept that offer if it came to you from JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University? More hands. How many of you would reject that offer if it came to you from JNU? There are a couple of hands. Okay, so the next speaker was Viju Krishnan, who actually, in a way can be a role model for many of you to look at. Very good education. He actually was heading a faculty at one of the good colleges in India. Then he gets interviewed to be selected at JNU as a faculty member. He says thank you, and he goes to work with farmers. Okay. The thing here is that there are several messages in this, and that's what I thought I will tell before I get into what his main points were. The messages in that are farming and working with farmers is not meant for uneducated people. Okay? Because we think that if you're educated, then you can't work with the soil. That's wrong. Okay? It's probably, like Shiv Shankaran said, it's because the parental pressure there. Some of the best farmers are the best educated people. At least somebody like Viju Krishnan, very highly educated, got a PhD. This program talks to him as Shri. Okay? I have a Shri because I don't have a PhD. He's put a Shri in spite of his having a PhD. But the fact here is that education is good wherever you go. Okay? And I had a point which I raised after that in the question, because I mentioned education, I'll mention that now here, that this question came about with regard to unemployment and the kind of thing that is there in the country, and Job gave some response to that. But my issue there and what I said was, unfortunately, all of you who are here don't demand quality education. And the reason for that is that the universities today are more for the syndicates and the bodies who sit on top. After that, for the teachers who don't want to teach. Then for the teachers who want to teach. Then for the students who don't want to study. And last of all, for the students who need to study. That has to change. Universities are supposed to be for students, not for teachers. And unless universities start functioning with the student as the most important part of the university, you are going to find that the quality of our higher education will go from bad to worse. When I studied in college, what I learned was useful for me for 10 to 15 years after that. When you are in college today, 2 to 3 to 4 years from now, a lot of what you studied is going to become irrelevant. What is necessary for you today is to learn to continuously learn. You just have to learn to continuously learn. The day you stop learning, you're finished. You're left behind. Somebody else goes ahead of you. It's a competitive world. We can't say that, whether or not I study or I don't study, I've got a PhD or I have an MTech from somewhere. Now this is what I'm going to carry for the rest of my life. It happened in the past, it's not going to happen in the future. This is something which is very important for you. So Viju Krishnan in his session was very clear. He said that, we are still talking about development 70 years after independence. He also mentioned something very interesting. A lot of the sustainable, our topic was the role of youth in achieving sustainable development goals that were set up. A lot of those goals, except maybe very specifically mentioning climate change, everything else is there in our constitution of this country. Okay? So you don't need the UN to tell us that we need. All those goals are already into our constitution. Climate change may not have been there with that word, but again, a lot of it is there in the principles of what we are talking about. So this was something which he brought out. He says the youth need to learn, and this is something for all of you. The youth need to learn to speak the truth in the face of power. You need to be able to look at somebody who is powerful and tell them, I think what you're saying is wrong. Either they have to convince you or you have to convince them. That is when dialogue becomes important. But if you say no dialogue, it is only my way, or you get out of the way, it doesn't work. So this is something which is very clear, that you need to be able to speak truth in the face of power, whoever that person be. With due respect to two very senior IAS officers who are here, I remember when I came to Kerala, I was the CEO of the Technopark. I was 32 years old. And I have a big problem calling anybody sir. Okay? I call sir for anybody who's a teacher who's taught me. Or I have to respect that person so much that I call him a sir. But otherwise, it's very clear. And with due respect to all of them, within the bureaucratic service, the sir is there as long as you are in service and you have this thing. The moment you move out, it is that fellow, unless you see them face to face. But the thing was, I had written a letter to the then Chief Secretary saying, "Dear Mr. So-and-so." I didn't think there was anything wrong because the organization where I came from, we used to call people by the first name, and I used to address older people by "Dear Mr. So-and-so." And then I get a call from that office saying, "Who wrote this letter?" I said, "I wrote the letter." "Why did you say Mr. So-and-so?" I said Mr. So-and-so because he's a man. If he was a lady, I would have said Mrs. So-and-so. He says, "That is not the way we operate." I said, "That's the way I operate." Nothing happened after that. But the fact is that I'm not saying don't call anybody sir, but don't call sir unless you really feel like calling somebody a sir. Because I have seen how people call somebody sir, and the moment that person goes out, they say that fellow. Okay? So the thing is, you can't tell somebody on their face that you're that fellow, then don't call that person a sir. So this is something, so let us just stop becoming, let us start being untruthful about what we are doing. Yeah, good. He also mentioned about unemployment rate being the highest in the past 45 years because the quality of education is something which we are not getting. Then we had Job Zakaria, who actually talked about the goals that have been set. He said that 25% don't get higher education. 55% of girls in India are anemic. He also talked about how government should invest more in health and education for the youth. More platforms should be provided to youth to express their views. And then we, of course, had the 3 students who spoke about the necessity of involvement youth in policy making. And then we had, that was somebody from Tamil Nadu. Then we had somebody from Kerala who talked about the youth of our state has immense potential and contribute to sustainable development. We had Anurag from Jammu and Kashmir who's talked about the necessity for sustainable growth and for governments should fulfill the developmental goals. There was also this question about the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and the response to that was, if after 70 years we still are talking about that subject, there is something wrong with what we have implemented in the last so many years. So overall, it was a very good session. I once again thank everyone who was part of it. Very good audience was there, and the speakers were tremendous. Thank you very much.